given the title, Why Black Lives Don't Matter, because that Black Life Matters has become something of a rallying call in that sense. So we deliberately put that title there to be provocative. And there's a potential cognitive dissonance that comes up when you hear or read that title where it says why black lives don't matter. It forces you even on an unconscious or subconscious level to try to make sense out of it for clarification. It seems to affirm the statement that black lives don't matter, and it does, in the sense that the cultural system has shown that they don't matter. And this address will explain why. It also asks the question in an ebonical manner, kind of like a slave asking the master, Massa, why black lives don't matter? And it can also be read like an arrogant white supremacist like Taney, the Chief Justice in the Dred Scott Decision, who would be insulted by the very suggestion that black lives matter. His reply would be an exclamation, not a question, why black lives don't matter. And his decision, he said, blacks are regarded as being of an inferior order, unfit to associate with the white race, so far inferior that they have no rights that the white man was bound to respect. I use a phrase often, life is a series of repetitive events linked by a chain of recurrent relations. That's the nature of reality. That is the nature of reality. Just like yesterday and today, even though we have different weather, or last season and this season, there have been winters before, there have been rains before, and there's been days before and nights before. Everything just keeps going. Night follows day, day follows night. That's the nature of it. I mean, in any given day, in any moment, standing anywhere, without the benefit of a clock or a calendar, you can't tell one day from the next. Okay, if you have no parameters, nothing to gauge by, where we live, you can look at the traffic and say, oh, okay, it must be time for people to go to work. So it's about that time. So it is. So I can narrow it down to it's one of those 5 days, Monday through Friday, right? And depending on which direction the traffic is going, you can tell whether it's the evening or the morning, even if it was cloudy. The point I'm making is that's the nature of life. And it's the same way with societies. If societies, as societies evolve and or don't evolve, you'll find the same kind of behavior in previous cycles repeated in subsequent cycles. Another philosopher, what does he say? He says that he who fails to study his history is doomed to repeat it, something on that order. Well, mashallah, we are sort of back at the same kind of place. The order of literal magnitude relative to the level of civility that we are in now is not as therefore savage as it was in the time of Ida B. Wells and Frederick Douglass and the like. Somebody's saying that there's no video online. Oh, okay, it's coming. Thank you. But let's put it in dollars and cents. Who knows what the value of the American dollar is today? It's about worth how much?
47 cents.
Oh man, you back in 1950s or something. About 3 cents. The American dollar is about 3 cents worth what it was when they quote unquote took the gold standard off or whatever else that was. It's going down. So that means a house that was bought for $5,000 in a given period of time back there, it would take about 97%, times more, right? That same house might cost $500,000 today because of the loss of value in the American dollar. So what I'm saying is that even though lynchings, like the ones you see on that first slide there, even though was just a regular thing, what was that? Nina Simone had this strange fruit, that the regular strange, that's the strange fruit that she's talking about. And when I saw that one with the two women on it, I just literally had never seen a picture of a lynched woman. I mean, that's just a different thing, just to imagine. But that was all a part of the package. That was all a part of the program. It happened, you know. So in any case, so I'm saying, even though the lynchings are not as quote unquote prolific looked at in that context, from where we stand right now, it's just as bad or worse at a time like this for senseless killing or quote unquote the kind of homicides that we're seeing from law enforcement. We got our own issues. We probably have replaced the KKK. Let's not get it twisted. For as far as the black lives taken by blacks, Bilalians killing each other. There's no how can you say, no confusion regarding that. And that's also a part of the problem, because they are also saying that black lives don't matter. So that's why I just kill you, because life is cheap. That's one of the part of the language of the streets, life is cheap. Your life don't matter. So we were saying our life didn't matter before white authority said our life didn't matter in this current age. Of course, they said it first, and I need to move on down the line with my noted material, because that's what they said a long time ago. Black life doesn't matter. And the point is that we bought into it, which is demonstrated by our behavior, illustrated by our behavior towards each other. And for hundreds of years, we have behaved in the same way. Why black lives don't matter. So you can see where so the prime area of correction needs to take place first before we keep pointing the finger there. But we still got to deal with what we got to deal with in that sense. But let's not be one-sided or narrow in our perception of what's going on here. Let's look at how Sister Ida B. Wells dealt with that.
In 1865. The Civil War was over. 4 million former slaves gained the most basic rights of citizenship: the right to marry, raise children, own property, to be protected by law. Within 2 years, black men would have the right to vote. It was a time of great optimism. A whole generation infected with the possibilities of freedom and justice. Among them, Ida B. Wells. But by the time she was 21, this child of slavery would find that promises made were not to be kept. Wells would launch a campaign against oppression that reverberates throughout America to this day. For nearly a century, it was against the law to teach enslaved African people to read or write. At the end of the war, 90% were illiterate. Free now and hungering for an education, young and old attended thousands of newly opened public schools throughout the South.
Our job was to go to school and learn all we could. My father was one of the trustees, and my mother went along to school with us until she learned to read the Bible. All my teachers had been the consecrated white men and white women from the North who came into the South to teach us immediately after the war. It was they who brought us the light of knowledge and their splendid example of Christian courage.
As Ida was growing up, the South was in convulsive change. Devastated by war, suffering crop failure, deprived of slave labor, the economy was in crisis. The African American was the scapegoat. A massive propaganda campaign was unleashed in the press, the schools, and the church, reinforcing beliefs that black Americans were genetically inferior, that freed from bondage, they would revert to savagery. They had to be restrained. But for Ida Wells, the first great challenge in life had nothing to do with race. In 1878, the Mississippi Delta was hit by a plague called yellow fever.
Ida's family, both her parents, who were involved in trying to help others who were dying in that epidemic, caught yellow fever themselves and died within 24 hours of each other. A young sibling died as well. And so, at the age of 16, Ida Wells found herself and her family orphaned. There are 3 other siblings. She was the oldest. And trying to decide, how to pull their life back together. She left school, made herself look older to get a teaching job.
Two years later, the veteran school teacher, Ida Bell Wells, moved to Memphis, 40 miles away, on the Mississippi River. Wells, part of the migration of black people to the big cities of the South, found a better paying job in the Memphis school system. As a school teacher, Wells was invited to join the Lyceum, a literary club. Black cultural and self-improvement societies were springing up all over the South. Many met regularly for music, recitations, and debates. Wells Club had its own newspaper, the Evening Star, and she was elected the editor. But democracy would be deferred. The North soon lost interest in the plight of the black American. In 1877, the last of the federal troops were withdrawn from the South. Within 5 years, the Supreme Court overturned the federal laws that provided equality for African Americans. The state's control of civil rights. The period known as Reconstruction was over. Southern states began to enact a series of laws to force the black citizen back into a subordinate class. A climate of intimidation was settling over the nation. A climate that was to radicalize the idealistic young schoolteacher, Ida B. Wells.
It was the most heinous of acts, the lynching of black people by whites. There was no due process guaranteed by the Constitution. It was a practice that could only happen because that sense of other, that sense that blacks were inferior, were property, had not disappeared with the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. If this were to change and blacks were to get the rights and justice laid out by the Constitution, they would have to make it happen themselves. After Reconstruction ended in 1876, more than 4,700 black men, women, and children were dragged from their homes, strung up, and murdered, often for no more an offense than speaking their minds or being successful. Someone needed to make these dark and hidden deeds known to the entire country. That person was Ida B. Wells Barnett. Ida B. Wells Barnett was born in Mississippi in 1862. Growing up during Reconstruction and its aftermath, She witnessed the depth of hatred against blacks and the gradual dissolving of their civil rights, particularly due process under law. Wells Barnett began her crusade against lynching in 1892 after 3 of her friends, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Henry Stewart, were lynched in Memphis, Tennessee, simply because they ran a grocery store that was more successful than their white competitors. In 1893, using her small Memphis newspaper as a pulpit, Wells Barnett courageously attacked the white supremacists who incited the lynching of blacks.
Ida Wells was, as her biographer refers to her, the lonely crusader. She spent a good deal of time trying to publicize lynching, both to whites, particularly in the North, to politicians, and to blacks throughout the country. What she wanted to do was to force the government to deal with the lynchers, to make lynching illegal, bring them to justice. And she did this in a variety of ways. She did it first as a newspaper reporter and an owner. And she was so charismatic and so vital that her first newspaper in Memphis was too strong for the white population, and they ran her out of town. But she then went to work for one of the best-known black newspapers of the time, the New York Age, and continued to publicize lynching. And as I said earlier, what she wanted was a political response, that is, the politicians to control and punish or at least arrest people who committed the lynchings. And her publicity campaign was also designed to tell the black community how they should respond to lynching. And she's interesting in the sense that she says, we need to publicize this. We need to publicize this as being illegal. We need to publicize this as being barbaric. We also need to get the white political leaders at the local level, the white economic leaders at the local level, and force them to control the white mobs that do the lynching. And she also threw a little wrinkle in there that she called part of the black response, and that is migration. And that was, if the white political authorities didn't control lynching, then blacks should leave the community and go find places where they could work and their liberties would be respected. And she not only publicizes lynching, but she also starts to publicize what later becomes known as the Great Black Migration.
When most Americans learned of the lynching of blacks, they were horrified. Consequently, following Wells Barnett's campaign, the number of lynchings lessened from a peak of 235 in 1892 to 107 by 1899. And anti-lynching legislation was enacted in parts of the South.
And I know that there's going to be profound enrichment in terms of our own lives and courage. Just looking at these two pictures that I have here on the slide, you can see I wanted to make the point that both her and Frederick Douglass lived to a ripe old age. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like some people, are afraid to act because they're gonna kill you. Well, maybe, but at the same time, the idea is that you have to stand for something, right? You have to, and that's what they did. And just think about her. She was like a 16-year-old doing what she had to do. So she couldn't have been much more than 20, if that, when she started going up against the whole white supremacist establishment, who they don't have no problem about lynching nobody, right? But did that deter her? No, it didn't deter her. I want to read this letter from Frederick Douglass to Ida B. Wells. Brother Michael, who is one of our regular contributors on our Blog Talk program, he sent me this letter on one of our earlier broadcasts. He's in Selma, Alabama. He bounces back and forth between Selma and Birmingham, so he's down there, you know, at should we still call it the belly of the beast or the buttermilk bottom? What do we call it? Either way, 2 BBs. Any case, here's the letter. It says, let me give you thanks. Dear Miss Wells, this is Frederick Douglass. Dear Miss Wells, let me give you thanks for your faithful paper on the lynch abomination now generally practiced against colored people in the South. There has been no word equal to it in convincing power. I have spoken, but my word is feeble in comparison. You give us what you know and testify from actual knowledge. You have dealt with the facts with cold, painstaking fidelity, and left those naked and uncontradicted facts to speak for themselves. Brave woman, you have done your people and mine a service which can neither be weighed nor measured. If the American conscience were only half alive, if the American church and clergy were only half Christianized, if American moral sensibility were not hardened by persistent infliction of outrage and crime against colored people, a scream of horror, shame, and indignation would rise to heaven wherever your pamphlet should be read. But alas, even crime has the power to reproduce itself and create conditions favorable to its own existence. It sometimes seems that we are deserted by earth and heaven, yet we must still think, speak, and work, and trust in the power of a merciful God for final deliverance. Very truly and gratefully yours, Frederick Douglass, Cedar Hill, Anacostia, D.C. So this is at the heart of the message that we actually want to bring today, and that is the line that's right there on the script where it says, even crime has the power to reproduce itself and create conditions favorable to its own existence. That's what we're experiencing. We're the crime, the lynch crime, but then just replace crime with the idea of culture. Just replace crime with culture, so with a culture. So it says even a culture has the power to reproduce itself and create conditions favorable to its own existence. That's the very nature of it. Once a culture gets established, that culture self-perpetuates. Okay? This is why nothing has changed. It has only changed the way it appears, or the way it presents itself, or the way that people evaluate it. But it's the same situation. But again, just like with that dollar, you know, that same dollar that you had in your pocket 2 years ago, inflation has taken value out of that dollar, even though it may never have left your pocket. It didn't have to go anywhere for you to lose that value. Okay? So in the same way, even though things appear to be, like you say, evolved and civil, etc., in reality, it's really the same situation. When you understand it. So let's look at the chapters we're going to be dealing with. We're going to look first at the origins of American racism, and then at the American racism, which is how ideologies are perpetuated and perpetrated. And thirdly, American culture as the womb of American racism. And finally, what is needed and why. So let's start looking at that history. So you have the origins of American racism. So, and I'm qualifying particularly American racism. We want to see racism as it operates and as it came into existence in America, the foundations for it, okay? So between zero and 1400s, there was actually no globalization. That is, people weren't going in and out of their countries per se. We're talking on a global scale, on the scale that it became when navigation became a normal process, especially for the Europeans and the like. Yes, others did that. Believe me, trust me. All the African stuff, all the Afrocentric stuff, I got it. Okay, that's stipulated. We're not framing everything on the basis of that. Now that's also a part of our issue. You stuck on everything calibrated black. And because everything is calibrated black, you can't see beyond those blinders. You actually get blacked out. So that's all I can do. I just tell you that, and I'm going to try not to react to every place where I know this is what the Afrocentrics would say about that, and this is what the blackologists would say about that. I'm going to try to make this the last time I stop to try to deal with that. But my sensibilities have to respect that. But do understand this. We're speaking to the matter in a manner that nobody else is addressing, that are not associates of Imam Muhammad in Al-Islam. Plain and simple. So I have to put a Moses piece on it. They say, well, we want some of the garlic and the lentils and the stuff that everybody else have. I say, well, you can go to any city and get that. That's what the prophet say, right? The prophet Musa, he said, you can go to any Misr and get that. You can go to any Egypt and get that. You can go to any city and get that. Well, so we're bringing, inshallah, and what you can't get anywhere else, mashallah. It's not just about me, it's about the association of Imam Muhammad, the insights and interpretation and the focus on history that Imam Muhammad gives, rahimahullah. And it's a valuable perspective. And even that is not the subject today. So let's move on. So the genesis of European and American racism is with the doctrine of discovery, which was issued by the Catholic Church of the 15th century. This gave Christian explorers the right to claim lands that they discovered and lay claim to those lands for their Christian monarchs. Any land that was not inhabited by Christians was available to be, quote, discovered, unquote, claimed and exploited. It was just like, Christopher Columbus discovered America, right? People already living here, but I discover you. What the hell? But that's what it was. 1492, right? Columbus sailed the ocean blue, as we say. The Nation of Islam, we would say he got lost. He wasn't trying to get there, as some say. That's why they call Indians now, because he was trying to get to India, and he landed where he landed. He just called the folks here Indians, right? But he was off course. In any case, so the point is that you'll recognize that the Muslim era